Hey everyone, welcome to Science in Perspective. In recent news, a US F-15E was shot down over Iran last week, and one of the crew survived, and he ended up spending 48 hours hiding in a mountain crevice while Iranian forces scoured the area with a bounty on his capture, but the CIA ended up finding him and pulling him out. That part is all real, but what came next is where the story kind of got away from a lot of people, right? Reports started circulating online in the news, New York Post being one of them, and they kind of just reference unnamed US officials. And they say that the CIA used a classified tool called Ghost Murmur to detect the downed airman's heartbeat from many miles away. Some people said 40, some articles said, through solid rock using something called quantum magnetometry combined with artificial intelligence. And then, of course, Trump amplified the claim and the internet ran with it. So the kind of words that you hear, those alone are kind of designed to work on your imagination, right? Ghost Murmur, quantum, AI, classified. Every word is a signal that in some sense says, do not ask follow-up questions, right? It sounds very authoritative. In this episode, I want to do exactly what those words are trying to stop us from doing, which is to ask the follow-up questions, because the physics here is not exactly ambiguous. There's not a whole lot of mystery here. People understand how science works, or at least scientists understand. It's not a matter of classified capability outrunning public knowledge, as many laymen might think. The numbers are the numbers, and they do not cooperate with the story that was actually told. So let's dig into that and kind of demystify some of this stuff. That being said, something obviously did find this man. That part's true. And the underlying sensing technology is genuinely interesting and genuinely advancing. In fact, the honest picture, though, is more interesting than the hype, but it requires us to actually look at it. So let's go ahead and do that in this episode, right? So secret tech claims tend to short circuit our skepticism, and that's a problem. A lot of people tend to lower their guard when a claim comes wrapped in authority. We've known this for a super long time. They call this authority bias. All the way back in 1963, you've got Milgram's obedience studies, and it still, to this day, remains kind of the foundational reference. This is where subjects deferred to perceived authority figures even when instructed to cause harm, right? Demonstrating that source credibility tends to suppress independent evaluation. Another meta-analysis that came out in 2004, for example, from the Journal of Consumer Research, it confirms that source credibility systematically elevates persuasion across context. The effect is robust and it's widely replicated. You can go look at some of those studies yourself. But this is something that's been known for a long time. People defer their judgment to the authority, especially if they get a lot of jargon words in there that they don't understand, right? So authority bias, the source signals credibility before the content does. Okay. Military plus quantum equals an automatic pass for most people, unfortunately, right? So let's kind of think about this. You got all the way back in 84, and I'm doing some of these older studies because I want you to understand how long some of this stuff has been known. Hasher and Zaks back in 84, for example, they did something on automatic versus effortful processing, right? They showed that unfamiliar technical vocabulary tends to trigger a shortcut where difficulty of evaluation gets misread as depth of content, right? Another one in 2012, you got Boosmeyer and Bruza, for example, Cambridge UP document showed how quantum framing applied to non-quantum context reliably increases the perceived validity in lay audiences, right? So the word does rhetorical work independent of the actual scientific content. So quantum is a novelty word for most people if you're not actually doing quantum research. And most people are going to just feel too underqualified to challenge anything like that. Makes sense. I mean, quantum mechanics is a pretty complicated field. There's lots to it. People spend years working on it. They typically have PhDs. You can't expect laymen to understand too much about it. Well, they could, but they are going to assume that they can't, or they're just not going to take the time to understand it. So secrecy gets, so that's quantum. Another one is secrecy, right? Secrecy gets treated as proof rather than a gap in evidence. Why? Well, if we cannot verify something ourselves, then we assume that people who can already did. Let's go over some definitions here as I kind of like set the foundation for this episode as we kind of peel back the layers here. So the problem is most people have no baseline for what is actually being claimed. Okay, so let's think about the heart, because we're talking about Ghost Murmur detecting something in the heart, apparently, and using that to locate the downed crewman. Well, the heart produces a magnetic field, not just an electric one, that's true. All the way back in 1963, right, Ball and McPhee, from the American Heart Journal, the first measurement of the cardiomagnetic field using induction coils was done. And it really established that the field, or the signal, you could just say, colloquially, that the heart is giving off is like 10 to the negative 10 Tesla at the chest surface. That's about 1 billion times weaker than Earth's ambient field. So this baseline figure, has not fundamentally changed in like 60 years of subsequent work. Okay, so why does that matter? Well, it's yes, the heart is genuinely detectable, but only barely and only up close. Like almost you have to be touching the chest, right? A magnetocardiogram measures that field with sensors touching the chest in a shielded room. And this is the other thing. So if we take a look at the state of clinical magnetocardiography, right, you can look at, Finici's 2005 expert review of cardiovascular therapy paper. Clinical MCG still requires magnetically shielded rooms and superconducting quantum devices, SQUIDs. And those are cooled to near absolute zero. So this is the half-century state-of-the-art in a controlled hospital environment, not a field deployable system. So you got to think about where these studies happen. It's not that the science can't happen in some sense. We've already established that it's way, way closer than 40 miles or even anything on the miles or even meters, right? You almost have to be touching the chest, and you're in environments that have super cooled equipment so that the quantum effect can actually happen, that the detecting coils can actually do their work. Everything's very isolated. We're not talking about something you put in your pocket or you put in a plane and go use. Quantum magnetometry uses spin states in diamond crystals to detect extremely faint fields. That is real science, right? So let's think about that diamond magnetometry, right? 2008 study, Applied Physics Letters, a foundational proposal for nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond as single spin magnetometers operating at room temperature. So that's a little interesting, right? Now we're getting away from the supercooling, and there is some push towards room temperature. There's a 2014 paper by Rondon et al. Reports on Progress in Physics. It was a comprehensive review confirming what they call femtotesla, per, and then it's got like Hertz sensitivity under ideal lab conditions. And it has this, environmental noise isolation, which was identified as the central unsolved challenge for any field deployment. So even if you're kind of getting some equipment, some studies, let's say, come out and it says you can still operate at slightly higher temperature, you still got this massive isolation that needs to happen so that the noise doesn't interfere with what is already an extremely weak signal. Again, like I said, it's like, 1 billion times weaker than what the Earth just gives off as its own, electromagnetic field, right? So why is that special? Well, okay, yeah, there's some research there that this stuff can maybe work at room temperature, and it's far more sensitive than older sensor designs. Okay, but again, you've got that isolation. So let's go to Ghost Murmur now. It's described as combining quantum magnetometry with artificial intelligence noise filtering from a high-altitude platform. Okay. Well, the problem is the 40-mile claim, or even just, I don't know if that was just Trump who said that, or there might have been in a few articles. But even if you just said a mile or two, right, it collides head-on with basic physics. Okay, the reported claim the CIA detected a heartbeat from miles away through mountain terrain. Okay, but magnetic fields from a dipole source, just understand it as the source that it's coming from, they decay with the cube of distance, meaning it drops off extremely fast, the signal. Okay, think about the magnetic dipole inverse cube law. This is very well known and established. Take a look at Classical Electrodynamics by Jackson, for example. The far field of a magnetic dipole decays as 1 over, let's say, the r cubed, right? So the human heart is well modeled as a magnetic dipole, something that can kind of give off a signal. Just think of it like that. But at 10 to the negative 10 Tesla at the chest, right, which is like 0.05 meters or something, And then at 1 kilometer, that field is going to be like, I don't know, 10 to the negative 22 Tesla. And that's well below any sensor's detection threshold in any environment, right? Bradley Roth out of Oakland University, he was quoted in the Scientific American in April 2026. He says, "We've been measuring the heart's magnetic field since the 60s. And even then, you can barely record it with the sensor touching the chest inside a shielded room." Okay, so the facts of physics that have been known for a long time, and even the recent stuff, is just colliding, like I said at the beginning, with the way that this news is being presented, right? And people tend to get excited about this, and they think that they're listening to science, but there's something very unscientific going on here, right? So this is devastating to the type of news that's coming out here if you take it too literally, because just at just 1 kilometer, the cardiac signal is already 1/1,000,000th of its strength at the chest. Okay, if you take the 40 miles literally, that you wouldn't say the signal's weak. It's actually physically non-existent above the noise floor, like whatever noise you have to overcome, right? The noise floor is not an engineering problem, right? I mean, think about Chad Orzel, Union College. He was quoted in Scientific American 2026. Even with advanced AI filtering, you cannot extract a signal that has dropped below the noise floor, right? You have this Shannon's channel, as they talk about Shannon's channel capacity theorem all the way back in 48, provides the information theoretic bound. When signal power falls below the noise power, right, no post-processing recovers the information. So AI filters operate on noise above the floor. They do not manufacture signal that does not exist. Right? Now laymen wouldn't know, I shouldn't say wouldn't understand this. They wouldn't know this, right? But this is the problem, right? People tend to just think that, well, the government must just have all these things that regular scientists don't have. No, it's actually not possible. They can have different stuff, but not dramatically different than what research all around the world is doing and has been doing for decades and decades. That's just not how science works, right? So it's very conspiratorial to think that they could have something dramatically better. It's just not true. No AI filter fixes this kind of noise problem. You cannot recover a signal that has dropped below the information theoretic floor from which you can actually extract a signal. You can only filter the noise above it. So AI can still do filtering, right? It can remove the noise that can be removed, but not that kind of lower bound, that fundamental part that is inaccessible. We've been measuring cardiac magnetic fields since the 60s and still require sensor contact in a shielded room to do it, right? So that you go back to that first detection, right? 63 by McPhee. You've got the first squid-based MCG out of 1970 by Cohen. Room temperature MCG attempts in the 2000s, right? In 6 decades, though, of active research, right, the detection range has moved from sensor touching chest in a steel shielded room to, at best, a sensor a few centimeters from the chest, still in a shielded room. So this is just the honest rate of progress against which any mile or 40-mile claim has to be evaluated, because that's just the science. So, this historical fact is kind of damning to the type of news that comes out, right? Because decades of progress and touching the chest is still the frontier, right? So it's not like the government's all of a sudden going to pull that back miles. So the real situation here, right? A real rescue happened, yes. And so something worked, yes. But the story is just not what was reported. The Dude 44 Bravo guy, an F-15 weapons officer, spent 48 hours hiding in the Iranian mountain crevice. It's probably true. I don't know. Right? The rescue site was described as a clean electromagnetic environment with low interference, almost no other heartbeats nearby. Okay. But that base case environment is still insufficient, right? Sources in, the Quantum Insider and some other place, April 2026, they described that the southern Iranian desert site as low electromagnetic interference with minimal competing biological signals, okay, and framed as ideal for a first operational deployment. But even if you grant that fully, right, the 1/r³ decay law, which we all know, scientists, right, it just makes the claimed 40-mile range impossible regardless of environmental cleanliness. A quieter environment raises the effective sensitivity ceiling, but it does not change the geometry of space, right? It does not change some of the fundamentals that would be needed to make such a claim plausible. Does that detail matter? Well, yeah, even best case conditions are nowhere near enough to make miles of detection plausible. The miles figure came from unnamed sources via the New York Post and was never officially confirmed. Right? Journalists ran with it anyway because the journalists aren't scientists and the laymen aren't scientists, and so it gets popular and people like it. Right? I don't know why they don't check with scientists, but well, I guess we know why. But a dramatic claim plus classified status means no one can officially push back because it's classified. So can't really prove it wrong. It's kind of unfalsifiable. It's not even wrong in that sense. So the gap between something phantom and miles of detection, right? Quantum heartbeat detection through rock is exactly where the hype lives. Okay. So published research, it tells us precisely where the technology actually stands. Diamond nitrogen vacancy center magnetometers, for example, are the most promising portable quantum sensing platform. But you say, okay, well that's the relevant benchmark, and they are the closest real technology to what Ghost Murmur is described as. There's a published study that measured a living rat's heartbeat with a diamond sensor, and with the sensor touching the body inside a shielded room again, though, right? So you've got this non-invasive magnetocardiography of a living rat based on diamond quantum sensors. So again, it's not like quantum sensors don't exist, right? 2026, the Quantum Insider was talking about this, right? NV Center diamond sensor successfully measured a rat heartbeat at room temperature without direct contact to the skin, right? It is a genuine advance. These things do happen, but you got to think about at what level. These are all subject to gradation, right? Like at what level is this happening? You got some critical constraints here, right? The sensor is positioned millimeters from the body in a tightly shielded, controlled lab environment with dedicated noise suppression hardware. Yes, it is remarkable science. It is not a field deployable long-range system. And this is the current frontier of the technology. It's not a solved problem from years ago, right? A 2025 performance evaluation paper confirms that sensors are improving, but fundamental range limits actually remain, right? You got performance evaluation of a diamond quantum magnetometer for biomagnetic sensing that came out in 2025 and assessed the NV center sensors for cardiac and neural signal detection. And what did they find? Sensitivity is improving. Yes, room temperature operation is actually reliable. Okay, but environmental noise isolation, again, in open settings just remains the binding constraint. Right? So commercial portable systems in development, real world use cases remain close range and controlled. This kind of paper is just explicit about the same gap that I keep bringing up, right? Outdoor environments flood any sensor with competing fields millions of times stronger than a distant heartbeat. Okay? So again, AI cannot filter that away, right? The competing signals do not sit on top of the heartbeat signal. They bury it entirely. So we need a repeatable way to evaluate extraordinary tech claims before the hype takes hold. Because you can't just leave it to the scientists, right? You can't just say, well, the general public is never going to be educated because they're going to run into that authority bias. It's just going to happen. And the news sources obviously don't check what they do with scientists too closely. Some of them might, but... So let's start with a signal, right? Like how strong is it at the source and what physical field type are we dealing with? Apply the decay law that I talked about, right? Magnetic dipole fields fall off with the cube of the distance, not linearly, right? And you can actually work out that example and you can show the math, right? It's 10 million times weaker than the weakest signal ever measured in any laboratory context if you actually, took the distance as they said. And that cube drop-off, just think of it kind of as an exponential drop-off. It's not linear. Like if I just back up from the source, it doesn't get a little bit weaker. It gets way, way weaker, right? And so forth. So you double your distance, it cuts the signal to 1/8, not 1/2, right? Remember that noise floor, right? These are the things that we could ask about when you start thinking about hype like this, right? What competing signals exist in that environment and how do they compare? Literally. Strip out the buzzwords, right? Does the claim still hold if you replace quantum AI with just the measurable physics? So you have this honest picture. Short-range quantum sensing is real and advancing rapidly. Yes, 40 mile, even meter heartbeat detection through terrain is not. So This framing, right, it serves the audience better. It respects the real science while refusing to let hype pass as fact. Okay, so that's just a little bit of what was in the news, and I think some other scientists kind of jumped on it as well. And maybe most of my listeners kind of knew that was all hype, but maybe not. And maybe you are someone that doesn't feel like they can go up against, not up against the authority, but just kind of critically think about the potential hype that is in a claim, even when it uses very authoritative language. Like, just use some critical thinking skills. Go look at what the baseline detection limits might be, or go ask ChatGPT, or go talk to someone you know, maybe who has a PhD in the area, or whatever it is, right? Like, do a little bit of critical thinking and research on your own. Get past the jargon, get past the hype, and see if what's being claimed is even within the realm of possibility. In this example, it's not. Okay? Anyway, so thanks everyone for listening, and for those of you who are watching, until next time, take care.